part I keep replaying isn't when he knocked on the window. It isn't even when I saw the second one step out from between the trucks. It's the seconds before that, when I was halfway across the parking lot and noticed the guy by the map board was holding the brochure upside down like he thought nobody would ever look close enough to tell. I remember that because everything else about the rest stop looked so normal, it made me feel stupid for noticing him at all. There were semis parked in a line off to the far side, engines low and steady, that heavy diesel hum you feel in your chest more than here. There was one family SUV near the building with one of those roof cargo bags strapped on top, and a blanket hanging over the backseat window like somebody had made a kid a little nest in there. The vending machines by the entrance were bright enough to hurt my eyes after so many hours on the highway. I could smell that mix of hot pavement, old coffee, and the weird lemon cleaner they use in public bathrooms. Cars went past Interstate 40 in long bursts, then nothing, then another burst. It should felt safe enough. Instead, I was looking at this man, pretending to study a map he clearly wasn't reading. And when I reached for my keys, he turned his head just enough to check how far I still had to walk. That was the moment I started wishing I hadn't gotten out of the car. I was driving from Oklahoma to Albuquerque for a friend's graduation, and I should have stopped hours earlier. That's the truth. I was doing that thing people do when they're tired and trying to act like they're not tired, turning the music up, chewing stale mint gum, rolling the window down even though the air outside felt dry enough to crack your lips. My car at the time was an old silver Corolla with a passenger door that only unlocked right if you hit the button twice. And the air conditioner made this whining sound whenever I pushed it past medium. It wasn't a dangerous drive or anything dramatic. It was just long, flat, dark, and long. I don't love driving alone at night. Some people do. They say it's peaceful. To me, it always feels like being too visible and too alone at the same time. You pass these gas stations, truck stops, and rest areas where everyone is moving through for their own reasons, and you realize nobody there knows you. Nobody would notice if something was wrong unless it got loud enough to interrupt them. Still, I had to make good time, and hotel prices around there were worse than I expected, so I kept going. I also had this stitched travel journal in the passenger seat, which probably sounds a little precious, but I kept one for every road trip. Nothing fancy, just cheap little notebooks with fabric covers. I sewed on myself because I liked having something to do with my hands during finals week. I always wrote down dumb details I knew I'd forget later. What I ate, what the sky looked like somewhere near the state line, what song was stuck in my head when I got gas. At that rest stop, before I got out, I'd spent maybe 10 minutes leaning over the center console writing under the dome light because I was so tired I didn't trust myself to drive without walking around first. I wrote that the vending machine area looked weirdly bright from the lot, like a stage nobody wanted to stand on. I wrote that the wind sounded thinner out there than back home. I wrote that I was only stopping for the bathroom, to stretch my legs, and maybe to splash cold water on my face. That was it. No intuition, no big premonition. I was exhausted, annoyed, and trying to be practical. The bathroom was empty except for one stall door hanging crooked and a paper towel dispenser that made a grinding noise every time I pulled on it. I remember pressing my palms against the sink because the water was colder than I expected, and staring at myself in the mirror with those fluorescent lights flattening everything out, trying to decide if I looked too tired to keep going. I had my hair shoved into a messy knot, my old green rain jacket on even though it wasn't raining because the zipper pull had broken off a year earlier, and I could only work it if I kept a little key ring through the hole. My eyes looked grainy. That's the only word for it. When I came back outside, I stood there for a minute, stretching my back and looking at the parked trucks. That's when I saw him at the map board. He was maybe 30 feet from the building, close enough to the light that I could see his hands, farther from the lot than most people would have stood if they were actually trying to read anything. He had one hand on the side of the board and the other in his jacket pocket. Ball cap, dark jacket, jeans. Nothing memorable except that the map was upside down from where he was standing. Not sideways, fully upside down. I almost laughed to myself. I actually did the little mental excuse-making thing right away. Maybe he'd walked around it, and I caught him mid-step. Maybe he'd been staring through it, not at it. Maybe he was just tired. People do weird things when they've been driving all night. So I headed back to my car, and he left the map board at the same moment. He didn't hurry. That would have been easier, honestly. If he had rushed, I think I would have reacted faster. Instead, he just started walking in the same direction I was, at the same pace, not looking right at me, like we were two strangers who happened to have parked near each other. That kind of thing is so easy to dismiss in the moment. Parking lots have lanes. People walk in the same direction all the time. I could hear my own shoes on the concrete, little dry scraping sounds, and the jingle of my keys against the keychain from New Mexico my aunt brought me years earlier. I remember thinking, don't be ridiculous. You are not the main character in a crime show. He's just going to his car. Then I slowed down a little to test it, and after maybe 2 steps, his pace changed too. Not enough that anyone watching would have noticed. Enough that I did. By then, I could see my Corolla ahead of me and the row of parked semis behind it. My car looked so small out there. I don't know why that hit me so hard, but it did. I suddenly felt aware of the space around it, the way the overhead lights didn't really light anything past their own circles. The family SUV was still there, but nobody was getting out. The trucks were full of sleeping drivers, or maybe not sleeping, maybe watching videos, maybe doing paperwork, maybe not paying attention to the lot at all. A highway roared in the distance. Nobody looked up. I hit the unlock button before I reached the driver's side. Got in fast, pulled the door shut, locked it right away. The sound that was made when the locks dropped, that blunt little clack, should have calmed me down. Instead, it just made me realize I was sitting in a parked car with the engine off and a man now close enough that I could see the stubble on his chin. He came straight to the passenger side window. He leaned down a little, not enough to press against the glass, just enough that I had to turn to face him. His expression wasn't angry. That was the worst part. He looked relaxed, almost friendly, like he was about to ask for directions or a cigarette. I cracked the window in my mind before I actually did anything, which I think is why I didn't open it. I could picture the whole stupid, polite version of myself doing it. Just enough to hear him. Just enough not to seem rude. Instead, I shook my head through the glass. He smiled. Then he tapped once with a knuckle and said something I couldn't hear. I mouthed, "No." He leaned closer and said it again, louder this time. "Do you always travel alone this late?" I felt my stomach drop so hard it was almost like missing a step in the dark. Not because of the words by themselves. People say creepy things all the time and act like they're joking. It was the way he asked it, like he already knew the answer and wanted me to know that he knew. His eyes flicked over the inside of the car when he said it. Passenger seat, back seat, my bags, my journal, then back to me. I grabbed my phone even though I didn't know who I was planning to call. I still had service then, I think. Or maybe I didn't. I honestly can't remember. My hands were starting to feel clumsy, like I couldn't quite get my fingers to do what I wanted. I said through the glass, "I'm leaving," and he gave this tiny shrug like, "Yeah, maybe." Then he asked if I knew whether the road ahead had construction, like we'd switched conversations, like we'd been talking normally, and I was the weird one for being tense. I looked past him toward the building, because that's what scared people do. They look for other people to confirm reality. The family SUV was still there. I could see a blue glow inside it, probably a tablet or a phone. One of the semis had interior lights on. The vending machines buzzed. There was even a trash can a few spaces over with a plastic bag snapping in the wind. Everything around us was ordinary. Nobody was helping. That was when movement behind my car caught my eye. At first, it was just a shape changing where there hadn't been one before. My brain took a second to make it into a person. A second man stepped out from between 2 parked trucks behind me, moving quietly enough that I hadn't heard anything over the diesel idle and the highway noise. He wasn't hurrying either. Same calm, same almost casual pace. He came in at an angle toward the rear passenger side. The first man kept talking. I couldn't tell you one word he said after that. I saw his mouth moving. I saw that same little smile. But all the sound in the world seemed to flatten out behind the pulse in my ears. I looked in the mirror. The second man came closer. And then I understood something all at once that I should understood sooner. The guy at my window wasn't trying to get anything from me. He was holding me there, keeping my eyes on him, making me stay in that moment where people still tell themselves maybe it's nothing, because if you admit what it is, you have to move. The second man went straight to the rear passenger side handle, not the driver's side, not the front passenger side where the first man was standing, that back door. My back right child lock had been turned off for months because my friend Anna used that seat all the time, and the interior handle stuck unless you slammed it. I had literally only noticed it because I was tossing my overnight bag in earlier that evening, and the door opened when it shouldn't have. He reached for that exact handle first. He didn't test the others. He didn't look. He just put his hand out and tried it. I don't remember deciding to start the car. I remember the sound of the engine kicking on, too loud in the enclosed feeling of the lot, and both men reacting at the same time as they'd practiced it. The one at the window straightened up and stepped back. The one at the rear door dropped his hand and moved away from the car without even a flash of surprise on his face. That was the part that made it worse. No panic, no scrambling, just an immediate, coordinated retreat. Like they knew exactly where the line was between attempt and exposure. I threw the car into reverse so hard I hit the curb behind me with a bang that snapped my head back against the seat. My tires chirped. I remember the wheel feeling slick under my palms because they were sweating so badly. I yanked it left, cut between two empty spots, and nearly clipped a concrete post on the edge of the lot. The first man had already moved out of the way. The second one was standing near the back corner of my car now, hands down, face blank. Neither of them chased me. Neither of them waved or yelled or did anything at all. I hit the exit lane too fast, bounced over the seam where the lot met the road, and got back onto Interstate 40 without even checking properly for traffic. A horn blasted somewhere behind me. I don't know how close I came to causing an accident. I just knew the highway opened up in front of me, and I pressed the gas until the speedometer was somewhere I don't even want to say out loud now. For the first few miles, I couldn't breathe right. I kept looking in the rearview mirror so much that I was probably more dangerous than anything I was trying to get away from. Every set of headlights behind me felt like them. Every dark pickup, every vehicle that stayed in the lane too long. My teeth were chattering, not from cold, just from adrenaline, and I couldn't get my jaw to unclench. I remember fumbling with the dashboard and turning the radio off because even the low music felt unbearable. About 10 minutes in, I realized I'd left the travel journal open on the passenger seat, and the pen had rolled into the footwell. That tiny normal thing almost made me cry. I think because it was proof that 10 minutes earlier I had been writing about vending machines and bad coffee. I liked that the night was boring. I kept glancing at the journal as if it belonged to someone who had no idea what was about to happen to her. I didn't stop at the next exit, or the next one, or the next one after that. I know a lot of people will say I should call the police right away. Maybe I should have. I did try calling once I had enough distance between me and the rest area, but I was shaking so hard I hung up before I got through because I couldn't figure out what to say first. Hi, there were two men at a rest stop, and maybe they were going to do something, except nothing technically happened because I drove away. Also, I couldn't tell you what they drove because I never saw a vehicle. Al. So one of them touched the rear handle of my car like he already knew something he shouldn't have known. I kept driving. At one point, I passed another rest stop sign, and my whole body reacted before my brain did. My foot lifted off the gas without me meaning to, then slammed back down. I stayed on the interstate. The road out there at that hour is its own kind of empty, not deserted exactly. You still get trucks, still get clusters of headlights, but the gaps between them are so long that you start feeling like you're suspended between one visible world and the next. My windshield had a smear on it from where I'd cleaned bug marks earlier that day, and every time oncoming lights caught it, it flashed white for half a second. I kept thinking there was someone in the back seat. I knew there wasn't. Still checked. I finally pulled off at a gas station almost 2 hours later because I was getting that floaty, exhausted feeling again, and I realized I hadn't really come down from it. The place was open, bright, and attached to one of those chain fast food counters with a sticky soda floor. I parked right by the door under the lights and sat there with the engine running for a full minute before getting out. My legs felt weak. Inside, there were two employees stocking cigarettes and an older couple arguing quietly over a road atlas. I went straight to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and just sat there with my jacket sleeves shoved into my hands because they wouldn't stop shaking. The stall smelled like bleach and old mop water. Somewhere outside the door, a hand dryer kept starting and stopping. I called my friend then, the one graduating. She answered sleepily and confused, and I could hear a box fan in the background at her apartment. I didn't tell the story well. I know I didn't. I kept jumping around because I was trying not to sound hysterical, which of course made me sound less clear. But I said enough that she got serious fast and told me to stay where people could see me, buy a coffee, and tell the cashier what happened in case anyone matching that description came through. So I did. I told the cashier, who looked disturbed in that tired, practical way service workers do when something awful enters their shift, and they immediately have to decide what version of concern is useful. He asked if I wanted him to call somebody. I said I didn't know. He handed me a cup of water anyway. I ended up talking to a highway patrol dispatcher after that. The woman on the line was calm and patient, asking the kind of questions that make you realize how little you really saw. Height, ethnicity, hair, vehicle, license plate, direction of travel, which side of the rest area, whether they touched the car, whether there had been threats, whether there had been witnesses. I kept saying, I don't know, and hating how small that sounded. I did know some things. I knew the first man had asked if I always traveled alone that late. I knew the second had come from behind the trucks, quiet enough that I never heard him. I knew they both backed off the second the engine started, not because they were scared, but because they had done whatever they meant to do before and knew when to stop. The dispatcher said she'd send the information along. Her voice stayed even, professional. But there was this pause after I described the second man going straight for the rear passenger side door, and then she asked me to repeat that part. I did. She asked if I had children. I said no. Then there was another pause, shorter that time, and she told me to stay where I was until daylight if I could. I did not make it to Albuquerque by morning as I'd planned. I got a cheap motel in Tucumcari with a buzzing sign outside and a heater that smelled faintly burnt whenever it clicked on. I pushed a chair under the door handle, even though the lock worked fine. I barely slept. Every time headlights moved across the curtains from the parking lot, my eyes opened. At some point before dawn, I took out the journal again. The page from the rest stop was wrinkled where my wrist had dragged through sweat. My handwriting changed halfway down, neat at first, then slanted and jagged. The last full line before I'd gotten out of the car said, "Truck sleeping, one family SUV, probably safer than it feels." Under that, later, in the motel room with the heater clicking and the ice machine outside dropping cubes into itself every half hour, I wrote down exactly what happened while I could still remember it. The map board, the upside-down brochure, the question through the glass. The second man is moving between the trucks. The sound of my car hitting the curb in reverse. They're watching me leave. I didn't want to forget any of it. I think part of me believed that if I got every detail onto paper, one of them would suddenly make sense. It never did. I went to the graduation the next day looking like I had the flu. I smiled for photos. I sat through speeches. I nodded while people talked about apartments and jobs and where they were moving next. But every time somebody said they had driven in late or were heading back after dark, my stomach tightened again. That sounds dramatic, but it wasn't dramatic in the moment. It was practical. My body had just filed something away and refused to put it back. For months after that, I stopped only at gas stations with big convenience stores attached. If I had to use a restroom at night, I'd call someone first and keep them on the line. I started backing into parking spaces so I could leave faster. I checked the back seat every single time I got in the car, even in daylight. I know how that sounds. I also know how quickly normal disappears when the wrong person sees you alone. I've had people tell me, maybe they were just trying to scare me, maybe ask for money, maybe mess with me because I looked nervous. I don't think so. Not because I know for sure what they wanted. I don't. It's because of how little either of them reacted when I moved. No anger, no surprise, no insult thrown after me. Just that immediate step back, like the scene had gone off script and they were already done with it. And in the rearview mirror, just before the curve took the rest area out of sight, both of them were standing under the parking lot lights, not chasing me, not waving, just watching my taillights go. I still have that stitched journal on a shelf with the rest of them, and that page is the only one I hate touching, because I still can't explain why the second man walked straight to the one door that would've opened. The next account is from someone who'd spent enough nights on the road that being alone wasn't what bothered him. By the time I realized the phones weren't really phones anymore, it was already snowing sideways hard enough that the parking lot lights looked blurred, like somebody had breathed on glass. The Surface Plaza sat off Interstate 80 by itself, all concrete and fluorescent light in the middle of open farmland, and I was standing near the coffee station with a paper cup warming my hands while a woman behind the register quietly told me the emergency call box by the fuel pumps had been broken for months. She said it the way people complain about things they expect nobody to fix. Not angry, just tired. Like if the building ever needed it for real, everybody there would find out at the exact wrong time. I remember glancing through the front windows at the pumps and thinking the red call box looked fine from inside. Bright, mounted straight, probably even had a little sticker on it saying emergency. Out there in the freezing rain, with the lot almost empty and the wind bending the sleet across the pavement, it looked like help. The woman was tearing open a roll of quarters with her thumbnail when she said, "Looks nice, doesn't work." Then the lights flickered once, the refrigerators gave a low mechanical groan, and every person in that building went still for half a second. That was the first time the night stopped feeling routine. I drove medical samples between hospitals twice a week back then, western Nebraska to central, sometimes farther east, depending on the run, always overnight if the receiving lab needed a certain window met by morning. Blood, tissue, cultures, whatever needed stable transport and a person who understood the chain of custody enough not to get casual about it. I liked the work more than most people think somebody would. It was repetitive in a clean way. Cooler temperatures logged, handoff signatures logged, route planned, weather checked, no surprises if everybody else did their jobs. I had a white fleet van with a temperature monitor mounted near the dashboard and insulated containers strapped behind a partition. No siren, no markings that meant anything to the public, just a company logo on the door and a clipboard that lived in the passenger seat. If you've spent enough nights driving empty highways for work, you get used to your own systems. Which thermos leaks? Which truck stop coffee is undrinkable after midnight? Which county roads drift over first when the wind picks up? You stop romanticizing isolation pretty quickly. It becomes weather, logistics, and time. That night in February, freezing rain hit earlier than forecast. I remember the first change because I could hear it on the windshield before I really saw it. A harder tick than snow, almost like handfuls of dry rice striking glass. Then the road sheen changed under the headlights. Then the steering went that tiny bit loose that tells you to stop pretending the next 10 miles will be better. I took the Service Plaza exit because I knew it from previous runs, and because the state road alerts were already getting messy over the radio. My plan was simple. Pull in, check the cooler temps, call dispatch, wait an hour, then continue if the interstate crews got enough salt down. Inside, the place was mostly empty. One cashier, mid-50s maybe, with reading glasses on a chain. A younger couple was sitting by the seating area with a duffel bag and 2 energy drinks, clearly stranded, and trying not to blame each other for it. One man is asleep in a booth with his arms folded over a winter coat. Later, he said he was a farm equipment salesman. At the time, he looked like any other tired traveler folded into himself. The floor by the entrance was slick with tracked-in slush and salt. The vending machines along one wall had that stale, warm smell they all have, heated plastic and old chips. A rotating hot food case near the register held 3 things, turning under orange lights that had probably been there since dinner. Every few minutes, the front doors rattled in their frame when the wind hit from the west. I checked my cargo first, opened the van, verified the containers were stable, and logged the readings with a pen that was starting to skip from the cold. My breath hung in front of me. The wind got under my collar and touched the back of my neck with that wet, needling cold that makes your shoulders rise on their own. The lot around me was nearly empty. A few cars, one plow truck was parked far off near the diesel lanes. Nothing unusual. When I came back inside, that was when the cashier mentioned the call box. Not because I asked. She saw me looking at the weather and said, "If you need roadside, use your phone. That box out there's been dead for months." I said, Good to know. She snorted a little and said, "If the phones work." At the time, I took it as what it sounded like, a worker sick of deferred maintenance in the middle of nowhere. Places like that survive on the assumption that most failures won't line up on the same night. Then the power flickered. Just once at first. Lights dimmed, came back on. Refrigerator compressors cycled down, then up. The digital menu boards over the food counter went black for 2 seconds and rebooted. Nobody panicked. You don't panic over one flicker in a storm. The cashier muttered something under her breath and looked up toward the ceiling like the ballast itself had insulted her. I checked my phone. No signal. I moved closer to the front windows, held it up without thinking, same as everybody does. One bar blinked in, then disappeared. The younger guy from the couple was doing the same thing near the coffee station. He said, "You getting anything?" I said, "Not yet." He laughed once, no humor in it. Perfect. A few minutes later, the gas pumps outside shut down. We knew because the canopy lights over them clicked off F and the pump screens went dark at the same time. The plaza stayed on, but only just. The overhead fluorescents developed that faint, inconsistent hum they get when power isn't stable. It got under everything. You could hear it behind the refrigerators, behind the heater fan, behind people trying to act normal. That was the first small rise. Then came the first small release. The lights steadied. A landline by the register started working again, or seemed to. The cashier made 2 calls, one to what sounded like management, and one to a maintenance number she clearly didn't expect to answer. She rolled her eyes after the second one and told us the backup system had probably kicked in. The younger couple managed to get somebody through for roadside. I heard enough of the conversation to catch that they'd blown a tire somewhere east and slid in on a spare they didn't trust. The woman was hugging herself, shoulders up, trying to keep warm even though the building was heated. Routine started creeping back in. I took one of the little plastic creamers for my coffee and sat at a table where I could see both the front doors and the hallway to the restrooms. Not because I was nervous, because that's what you do after years alone on the road. You build little habits that make life easier if something stupid happens. I called dispatch, got through for maybe 20 seconds. Enough to say I was holding at the plaza because of ice. Then the line dropped clean in the middle of my sentence. I called back, connected then dead again. The younger guy tried roadside a second time from the landline near the register. Same thing. He'd get a voice on the other end, say who he was, maybe get 6 or 7 words in, then the call would sever. The cashier tried the line herself and got the same result. "That's weird," she said, which was more concerning than if she'd sworn. The weather outside kept worsening. Freezing rain turned to a mix of sleet and wind-blown snow. You could hear it against the windows now, a hard hiss that rose and fell with gusts. Every time the front doors opened, cold rolled in across the floor around our shoes. The salesman woke up, rubbed his face, bought a cinnamon roll he didn't want, and joined the rest of us in the silent business of checking phones that no longer had signal. We started talking because people do that when systems stop working. They form temporary groups around irritation before fear has a name. The cashier said state police had already posted limited travel advisories westbound. The younger couple said they only got off the interstate because the spare felt wrong above about 50. I said I was carrying time-sensitive medical material and would need roads open before dawn. The salesman said his hotel reservation had been an hour east and he might as well sleep in the booth if he had to. Everything about the conversation was ordinary. Then the side entrance was tried from the outside, not the main glass doors at the front. The side one down the short hall by the vending machines, the one marked employees and deliveries. It made a metallic jolt first, a hard shake of the handle, then a louder bang that carried through the building. All 4 of us looked that direction at once. The cashier said no, not loudly, just immediate, like she already knew something about that sound. The banging came again, 3 hard hits, then a rattle against the push bar. The woman from the couple stood up so fast her chair legs screeched. The younger guy moved in front of her without even seeming to think about it. I set my cup down. My first thought was delivery driver. The second thought was that somebody was locked out. The third thought was that nobody should have been at that side door, because the delivery lane behind the building had been unplowed when I arrived. The cashier didn't move toward it. She stayed behind the register and said, more to herself than us, nobody should be out there. The banging came a fourth time. Not frantic, measured, that matters. Frantic would have been easier. Frantic says, help me. This sounded like somebody checking whether the door would give if they committed to it. The younger guy said, shouldn't we see who it is? The cashier snapped, through what? The wall? She was right. There was no window in that hall. No camera monitor up front either, not one that was on at the time. If there were cameras outside that entrance, they were fed somewhere in the back office. The banging stopped. That was the second release, shorter than the first. Nobody moved for maybe 10 seconds. The heater kept blowing. Somewhere, a freezer compressor kicked on. The cashier came out from behind the register then and locked the front doors, which until that moment, I hadn't realized she hadn't already done. I said, do you have cameras behind the building? She nodded. If the system's up, can you check it? System reboots when the power burps. Takes forever. The younger guy volunteered to go with her to the office, then back. She said no at first, then changed her mind when the next flicker hit and half the ceiling lights dimmed again. I went too, partly because more eyes are useful, and partly because I didn't like the idea of the only employee vanishing behind a door while the rest of us stood exposed in front. The office was cramped, smelled like burnt dust from an old space heater, and had a monitor bank that was in the middle of restarting. Blue screens, brand logo, loading bars. We stood there waiting while sleet tapped somewhere in the building frame, and the cashier muttered that management never replaced anything until it failed in the weather. One camera came back first, front lot, empty except for our vehicles and snow crossing the image sideways. Second camera, fuel island, dark pumps, no one there. The third camera failed to load. Fourth camera, back service lane, static for 2 seconds, then picture. Nothing on it at first glance except blowing snow and the back wall of the building lit by a security lamp. No person, no delivery truck, no movement except the weather. The younger guy exhaled hard and said, maybe it was the wind. Then we all saw the tracks. Dark curved lines in the thin layer of accumulating snow, crossing the back lane in a circle around the building, fresh enough that the edges were still sharp. Tire tracks, not old. One set closest to the wall, another wider arc further out. Like a driver had looped around, slow and deliberate. I looked at the screen, then at the cashier. Did a vehicle come through back there? She said. We would have heard it. And that was true. The service lane ran right behind the wall. Any truck, or even a pickup over that packed surface, should thrown sound into the building, especially with the storm carrying everything sideways. None of us had heard headlights wash across the front windows either. No sign of a vehicle moving from one side to the other. The salesman called out from the front for us to come look. When we got back, he was pointing through the main windows at the lot. Snow had built enough on the pavement now to show fresh arcs there too. A loop passing the far edge of the lot and disappearing around the dark side of the building. No headlights visible. No engine sound we could isolate from the storm, just tracks. This is where the night shifted from inconvenience into something else, because every explanation started requiring another failure to support it. Power instability. Phones that connected but would not stay connected. Emergency box dead. Cameras slow to reboot. The side entrance was struck by someone who didn't stay for help. Tracks from a vehicle nobody saw arrive. Anything you can work around. Stack enough of them, and the lack of help becomes its own event. We pulled the seating area closer to the front, not in a panic. More like people setting up for a long wait. The cashier locked the hallway door to the side entrance. The younger couple sat together now. No more pretending they weren't anxious. The salesman kept looking out like he thought a plow would materialize if he stared hard enough. I checked my samples again. Temperatures held. That mattered. Work gives you something to do with your hands when your mind starts making scenarios. I filled out another time log. Adjusted a strap that didn't need adjusting. Wiped sleet from the van window, though I had no intention of going back out unless I had to. Around midnight, the pounding started again, this time on the front doors. Not wild, not desperate. 3 hits. Pause. 3 more. The glass shook in its frame. We all flinched. The cashier killed half the lights in the seating area on instinct, like dimming the room would make it harder to see us. It probably did. Outside was a wash of white and reflected sodium light. The doors were just black glass with weather streaming over them. The younger woman whispered, "Don't open it, nobody was going to." Another 3 hits. I moved closer, staying off to the side. Not because I wanted a better view. Because if somebody was testing sightlines through the glass, I didn't want to stand centered in them. The cold coming off the door was strong even from a few feet back. I could smell wet rubber matting and coffee gone bitter on the burner. No face appeared against the glass. No silhouette, just the sound. Then it stopped. We waited. Nothing. The cashier said state police had already told her, on one of the brief calls that actually connected, that roads west of us were icing faster than crews could keep up with. They couldn't promise anyone out before daylight unless there was an injury. She said it with her mouth set in a straight line, like repeating policy made her angrier than the weather did. Then the cameras finally finished a full reboot. We crowded around the office monitor again, closer this time, close enough that I could smell the younger guy's wet coat drying and the cashier's hand lotion, something cheap and powdery. The front lot camera showed the same pale blur of storm and parked vehicles. Back lane camera loaded next. A pickup truck was parked behind the building, not moving, already there. Dark color, maybe blue or black under the night mode, older model, boxy, parked just beyond the rear security light, where the image got grainy. It had been sitting there long enough for snow to gather along the hood edge and roofline, long enough that it should have been visible the whole time if the camera had been up, long enough that none of us could account for when it arrived. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Then the cashier said, "It wasn't there." I believed her. Because if a pickup had pulled behind that building and idled there for an hour, somebody would heard it. If it had come around from the front, we would have seen the lights cross the lot. If it had parked there before any of us arrived, then why the pounding? Why the fresh loops in the snow? Why the calls connecting and dying, as if something kept allowing the first contact and then cutting it off? We kept watching the monitor. Nothing moved in the truck. The angle was too poor to see inside. No dome light, no door open, just the shape of it half inside weather and half outside. The younger guy said, "Call the police again." The cashier did, connected, dropped. She called again. Same result. I tried from my phone and got 1 bar, enough to start the call, not enough to hold it. The salesman tried too. The same pattern every time, connection. 1 human voice if you were lucky. Then dead silence and disconnect. That might have been weather alone. Maybe it was. But after a while, the effect is the same either way. You are inside a lit building in the middle of nowhere, and every route from fear to help is there in theory and failing in practice. The next few hours stretched in a way that's hard to explain if you've never sat through a night waiting for morning, because there is no other option. Time didn't pass evenly. It collected around sounds. The first time we heard the vehicle circle the building after midnight, we all knew it at once. Low tires over packed snow. Slow, deliberate, not accelerating, not leaving, just making the loop. Front lot to side wall to back lane and around again. Sometimes close enough that the building frame carried a faint vibration. Sometimes farther out, just the suggestion of movement under the storm. We'd look at the cameras, catch a glimpse of headlights at the edge of one frame, then gone. Once we saw the truck plainly crossing the back image, moving at maybe 10 miles an hour. Later, another set of tracks overlapped the first arcs outside, then another. At some point, the younger woman started crying quietly, not sobbing, just sitting with tears running down her face because there was nowhere for the fear to go. Her boyfriend kept saying it was probably kids, probably some messing around, because the weather had stranded everyone. He said it too often, which told me he didn't believe it anymore. The cashier produced an old wooden dowel from the mop closet and wedged it through the front door handles. The salesman found a tire iron in his trunk and brought it inside. I had a flashlight and one of those folding emergency blankets in the van. Suddenly, all of us had become people inventorying objects like that, which meant we still controlled the night. Around 2 in the morning, the sound stopped for almost 20 minutes. That was the 3rd release, and the cruelest one. You start thinking maybe they got bored, maybe they left. Maybe the truck was some local who realized the place was occupied and decided to move on. We even talked a little more normally during that stretch. The cashier made a fresh pot of coffee. The salesman sat back down. I filled out another transport note by hand in case my digital log failed later. Ordinary motions trying to rebuild ordinary thinking. Then the side entrance alarm chirped once. Not a full alarm, just the contact tone that means the door sensor registered movement. Nobody had opened from the inside. The cashier went pale in a way that cut 10 years off her and added 10 at the same time. She said, "That sensor's on battery," meaning even with the power unstable, that one thing should still be functioning. We did not go to the hallway. We stayed exactly where we were, staring toward it, listening. No pounding now, just one faint scrape, metal against metal, like somebody touching the push bar from the other side to feel whether it still held. The younger guy took one step toward the office, and I told him to stop. I don't know why he listened to me instead of the cashier. Maybe because my voice sounded more certain. Professional habit again. When people don't know what to do, they listen to the calmest person available. We stood there in fluorescent light-smelling coffee, bleach, wet wool, and that overheated dust from the ceiling vents, while outside somebody tested doors and drove slow circles around a building that had no working emergency box and no reliable phone line and no guarantee of police before dawn. That was the real peak of it for me, not the noise itself. The understanding of how little separated normal infrastructure from a roomful of civilians sitting in a box and hoping the weather would outlast them. Nothing broke, nobody got in, but the truck or trucks kept moving. Near 4, we could hear more than one engine some of the time, or thought we could. It's dangerous to claim certainty in weather because sound travels strangely over ice and open fields. A single vehicle can seem like two if it's bouncing around walls and wind. Still, there were stretches when the loops outside sounded staggered, one passing, then another farther off. The cameras caught only fragments. A rear quarter panel here. Headlights are washing the side wall there. Once, what looked like a second set of lights beyond the fuel island vanished when the power blinked again. By dawn, all of us looked used up. The younger couple hadn't slept. The salesman had stopped offering explanations. The cashier had cigarettes lined in a perfect row on the counter, because I think neatness was the only thing left she could impose on the place. I sat by the front windows in my company jacket with my transport clipboard on my knee and watched the sky lighten from black to iron gray. When sunrise finally gave us enough visibility to see the lot clearly, it was empty. No pickup behind the building, no truck by the fuel pumps, no headlights on the service road, just layered tire tracks all around the structure, looping and overlapping in the dirty snow, then thinning toward the highway entrance where the plows had finally come through. State police reached us a little after full daylight. 2 cruisers, salt caked up their doors, tired men climbing out with that winter stiffness in the shoulders. 1 trooper walked the loops around the building. Another went through the office footage with the cashier, while the rest of us gave statements one at a time. I missed my delivery window by hours. The receiving lab already knew by then. Nobody cared. Once I explained the conditions, medical timing took second place to the fact that a group of stranded travelers had spent the night effectively under siege by people we still couldn't identify. The camera footage wasn't good. Grainy, intermittent, storm-blown, and interrupted by power resets. But it was enough to show the pickup parked behind the plaza earlier than any of us realized. Enough to show passes around the building. Enough that 1 trooper leaned in close, paused the frame on the truck's front quarter, and said, "Did any of you see more than 1 vehicle with this? Not a driver, not plate. Did you not see a person? More than 1 vehicle with this." I said, "With it? How?" He looked at me for a second like he was deciding how much to say, then asked again whether we had seen or heard a second vehicle following the pickup. I told him maybe, maybe not. We heard things. The storm was loud. He nodded like that answer fit into something he already knew. I've thought about that night a lot since then, more than I probably would if it had been 1 obvious crime with 1 obvious report number and 1 arrest. Instead, it was systems failing in layers. Call boy X neglected, backup power unstable, communications intermittent, cameras half-blind, roads impassable. 1 isolated building became, over the course of a few hours, a place where being surrounded by infrastructure meant almost nothing. I still drive at night for work, though not that route anymore. Habits got stricter after that. I fuel earlier. I don't count on remote service plazas for anything critical. If the weather says stop, I stopped somewhere with a town attached to it, not just an exit and a roof. Maybe that's caution. Maybe it's age. Either way, the lesson stuck. Because what got under my skin wasn't only the truck circling in the storm. It was the trooper recognizing the model before the footage had even finished loading, and asking whether we had seen more than one vehicle following it. The last story is the one that bothered me most after the fact, because for a while I thought I'd already gotten away from it. I was halfway down a wet gravel path with my headphones on when I first heard the metallic banging, and the stupid thing is, I remember being more annoyed than alarmed. Not because it sounded harmless, it didn't. It was just so regular that my brain filed it under machinery before I let myself think anything else. A hollow metal knock, then silence, then the same knock again about half a minute later, somewhere deeper in the trees beyond the rest area. Not close enough to pinpoint, not distant enough to ignore. The kind of sound that makes you stop walking and lift one side of the headphones away from your ear to make sure you're not hearing something from the recording device itself. I was near the Oregon border on Highway 199, pulled into one of those small forest rest areas that's basically a parking loop, a bathroom building, 2 picnic tables, and a lot of dark timber pressing right up against the edge of the pavement. It had rained on and off all evening. Everything smelled like wet bark and cold dirt. Trucks passed on the highway every few minutes, the sound swelling through the trees and fading just as quickly, leaving the place feeling even more else afterward. I had my recorder in one hand, one earbud in, and a little windscreen clipped over the mic. The light over the picnic area was flickering in that weak yellow way old bulbs do when they're trying not to die. Then the banging stopped. That was the part that got me, not the sound, the silence after it. I do solo drives a lot, and unlike most people, I actually like stopping in quiet places. I do landscape photography as a side project and sound work for myself. Nothing professional enough to justify the amount of gear I keep in my trunk, but enough that I plan trips around places I think will sound good at night. Marsh edges, canyon pullouts, and tree lines after rain. I carry a handheld audio recorder most of the time because bird calls travel differently in darkness, and because road noise, wind, and distance do weird, useful things if you're patient. Some people come back from drives with snacks and gas receipts. I come back with 30-second clips of owls and tires on wet asphalt. So when I say I was comfortable alone, I mean I wasn't doing something that felt brave to me. It felt normal. I'd been on a solo photography run through southern Oregon and northern California, chasing weather mostly, stopping wherever the light or the sound seemed worth it. I had a hatchback with a sleeping bag in the back, 2 camera bodies, a thermos that leaked if I lay it down sideways, and a recorder that fit in my jacket pocket. My plan that night was just to grab a few ambient tracks before driving to a motel farther south. The rest area itself seemed ideal at first. Remote, yes, but peaceful. Tall black trees, wet pavement holding the glow of one failing lamp, a picnic area with enough open space for owl calls to carry. The bathroom building was locked for cleaning, or closed for the night. I don't remember which, but that didn't matter to me. I wasn't planning on staying long. I parked beneath the light because that's where I always start if I'm recording in a strange place. Good reference point, easier to find the car if you wander a little. I clipped the recorder on, checked my levels, and stood still for a minute listening. There was a truck on the highway, then another farther off, water dripping from branches. A barred owl maybe, way out to my left. Hard to tell with the road reflections. The air had that cold, damp feel that settles in your sleeves and the back of your neck before you notice it anywhere else. It was good, better than good, honestly. The kind of quiet that has layers in it. The end while reviewing the first take through headphones. I heard the metallic banging, every 30 seconds or so. Hollow, repeating, not from the highway. Lower, duller, as if it were coming from somewhere downhill through trees and over wet ground. I took one earbud out and listened without the recorder. Nothing. Put it back in. There it was again on playback. That happens sometimes with distance. A microphone picks up patterns better than your ear does if you're moving around or distracted. I assumed road maintenance equipment. A chain against a post, some loose gate hardware. It wasn't comforting exactly, but it was normal enough that I didn't leave. I walked a little farther past the picnic area onto a narrow gravel path that cut toward the trees. I wasn't hiking. more like drifting, following sound in the mildest possible way, the same way you'd lean toward birdsong to improve the angle. My boots sank a little in the wet gravel. The recorder picked up every footstep louder than I wanted, so I paused a few times to stand still and let the forest settle again. The banging repeated. Closer now, or maybe just clearer. I remember thinking it was probably echoing off the slope weirdly. Highway 199 bends through that whole area in ways that make distance hard to read. You hear a truck from one direction, and it arrives from another. Sound rolls around in there. Then I noticed tire tracks, fresh ones. They cut off from the paved edge of the rest area onto what looked like an old maintenance road angling downhill behind a metal gate. The gate itself was closed. The chain looped through, a sign on it half reflective in my light. Maintenance access only, something like that. The tracks went around the side where the ground had softened enough to show tread clearly. That was the first real wrong note, because road crews don't usually drive around their own gate in the middle of the night in a place like that, unless they're trying not to be seen, and if they were officially working, there would have been more signs of it from the highway. I stood there longer than I should have, listening. No voices, no engine, just drip from the trees, far traffic, and then that metallic knock again from somewhere below. At that point, a more sensible person probably would have gone straight back to the car and left. I almost did. But curiosity is one of those flaws that feels harmless right up to the point it isn't. Also, this part matters. Nothing had happened that justified fear yet. Fresh tracks near a maintenance road in the forest. A weird noise, that's all. You can make those things ominous in hindsight. In the moment, they were just enough to keep me looking a little longer. So I moved down the side of the gate line, staying on the rest area side of it, trying to get a better angle through the trees. The slope dropped away faster than I'd thought. Through the trunks, maybe a little lower than the rest area. I caught the edges of something pale and geometric that didn't belong in a forest. Plastic, reflective fabric. I crouched a little without really meaning to and shifted 2 steps left. Then I saw more. Plastic tarps strung low between trees. Portable floodlights, not on at the time but clearly set up. And beyond those, parked in a rough line where the ground flattened out, several vans. No plates. Not missing in a way I could only assume. I could see the mounting spots. Empty front and back on the ones angled toward me. The cold in the air suddenly felt different against my face. Sharper. My first thought was an illegal grow operation. Even though I knew almost nothing about that world, besides what people say casually. My second thought was a hidden campsite, some off-grid group that didn't want attention. My third thought, the one I didn't like enough to examine, was that there were too many vehicles and too much setup for something that wanted to stay private but harmless. I lowered the recorder. I also became aware, all at once, of how visible I might be from downhill if anyone there looked up. That's the watched feeling people talk about, I guess. Not seeing eyes. Just suddenly editing your own movements as if they might be read. I crouched a little more. Took my hood off because the fabric made noise when I turned my head. Slowed my breathing because I could hear it in the headphones. I don't know if any of that would have mattered. It felt like it mattered. Nothing moved below. The floodlights were off. No doors opened on the vans. No voices carried uphill. But the arrangement itself was enough. Temporary and organized. Hidden just beyond the edge of a public rest area. I backed away, slow at first, placing my feet carefully on the wet gravel so I wouldn't skid or send rocks downslope. Then faster once the gate and path blocked the view. My chest had gone tight in that practical way where you're not panicking yet, just preparing to move if something changes. I didn't run. Running felt louder than necessary. Back at the picnic area, the flickering lamp buzzed overhead. My car looked exactly where I'd left it, rain-speckled, completely ordinary. I unlocked it, got in, and locked it again before setting the recorder on the passenger seat. I waited a few seconds. No one came out of the trees. No flashlight beam crossed the lot. No vehicle started below. That helped. A lot, actually. Enough that my brain began doing what brains do when something doesn't escalate immediately. It started minimizing. Illegal dumping site, maybe. Poachers. Somebody is using public land in a way they shouldn't. Whatever it wasn't my problem if I left, so I left. Back onto the highway, southbound, heater on low, windshield wipers squeaking every few passes because they needed replacing. My hands were steady again within 10 minutes. That's another thing I keep coming back to. How quickly relief can feel earned just because danger didn't follow you fast enough. About 20 miles later, I reached a larger gas station, one of the bright ones with truck parking and a fast food counter still open. There were enough people there to make the whole forest stop feel embarrassed and distant. Truckers in line for coffee, a family wrangling a sleepy teenager toward the bathroom. A guy in hunting camo is buying windshield fluid. Fluorescent light, greasy food smell, radio somewhere behind the counter. Normal. I parked under the canopy, stretched, and actually laughed once to myself while locking the car. Not because it was funny, more because I could feel myself deflating, and I was a little embarrassed by how tense I'd gotten over some vans in the woods. Inside, I bought coffee in one of those paper cups that never insulate enough, and a packaged muffin that tasted like cinnamon-flavored sponge. I leaned against the condiment counter and pulled out the recorder because I wanted to check whether the metallic banging had even been worth stopping for. Half of field recording is going back through things and finding out what sounded interesting in person turns into useless low-end mud on playback. I put one earbud in and scrolled back to the clips from the rest area. The first one had highway wash and drips. Fine, not great. The second had a cleaner owl call, plus the metallic knock in the distance, more regular than I'd realized, with about half a minute between strikes. I listened further in, my own footsteps on gravel. A little breath noise from when I'd crouched by the gate. Then something else, low in the mix under the owl and the road in my shoes. A voice. I took the earbud out, stared at the recorder, then put it back in and replayed that section. The voice was clearer the second time because now I knew to listen for it. Male. Close enough to the recorder that the consonants were distinct, but not loud, calm, conversational. He's walking back uphill now. I stood there with the coffee cup in my other hand and felt the heat from it against my palm, while everything below my ribs seemed to go hollow. Because the voice came several seconds before the sound of my own footsteps returned to the gravel near the picnic area. I replayed it again. There was no question. He was walking back uphill now. Then, after a short burst of wind noise and one more distant metallic knock, another voice answered, also male, farther away, but still intelligible enough. Let him leave. I think I listened to that exchange 6 or 7 times in a row, right there by the creamers while people moved around me, and nobody had any idea that the room had just changed shape. I looked over my shoulder so sharply that I sloshed coffee onto my hand. There was nobody there except strangers doing normal late-night things, paying, yawning, checking truck routes on phones. The highway hissed outside. A fryer timer beeped from the kitchen. But the voices on that recorder were impossible in the way only very specific things are. Not supernatural, impossible. Worse than that, human and logistical. Somebody had been close enough to speak near my recorder without me knowing. Close enough to monitor where I was on the path. Close enough that another person, somewhere nearby, could answer and decide not to stop me. I took the earbud out and just stood still. Then I replayed it through the recorder speaker on the lowest volume, because suddenly I didn't trust having one ear blocked. The words were still there, faint but undeniable under everything else. He's walking back uphill now. Let him leave. If I'd heard them in the woods, I would have bolted. Because I didn't, because they stayed hidden, I got the false version of relief. I got to drive 20 miles and tell myself I had imagined danger where there was only secrecy. What shook me wasn't just that they knew I was there. It was how early they knew. They were aware of me before I got back to the car, before I reached the lit area, maybe before I even saw the vans, which meant at least one person had been watching me the whole time I was standing there, trying to decide whether I was overreacting. I threw the coffee away, went straight back outside and drove. No bathroom stop, no food, no motel. Just south, then east, then home by the most direct route I could handle overnight. I kept the doors locked, the recorder in the passenger footwell, and the radio off. Every rest area sign I passed after that felt personal. I used only larger lit gas stations if I absolutely had to slow down, and even then, I chose pumps or parking spots where I could see the highway entrance and the store doors at the same time. The weird thing is, I didn't call the police. I know that sounds irresponsible. Maybe it was. At first, I told myself I didn't know what I'd even be reporting. Hidden vans in woods near a maintenance road. 2 male voices on a recording. No plates, no faces, no clear crime witnessed. But if I'm honest, there was another reason. Those voices sounded so unconcerned, so in control. Whether I stayed or left had already been evaluated and decided. Calling someone from the gas station 20 miles away felt too small and too late against that. By the time daylight came, I was halfway convinced exhaustion had distorted the audio somehow. Wind can shape words. Traffic can smear syllables into patterns your brain completes. I work with recordings enough to know perception plays tricks. So when I got home, I listened again on better headphones. Then through editing software. Then with noise reduction. It only got clearer. Not much, but enough. The first voice had a slight rasp on the word walking. The second clipped the T and let like he was keeping his volume down. My footsteps came after, not before. No editing artifact explained that sequence as a way. I didn't use any of the audio from that trip. I didn't even unpack the cameras for a few days. I told friends I cut the drive short because of the weather and left it there. For a while, I kept the recorder and memory card in a locked compartment of my desk, where I put spare batteries and old SD adapter is. Partly because I wanted to decide later whether to turn it over to somebody. Partly because I didn't want that card just sitting in a camera bag like any other piece of gear. Weeks passed. Life did what life does: work, laundry, email. Routine sanding down what happened until it started to feel strangely manageable. Still bad, but contained. Then one Sunday afternoon, I opened that desk compartment looking for an adapter R, and the memory card was gone. Not the recorder, just the card. The recorder was still there in its little zip pouch. Spare batteries are still there. Even the cheap foam windscreen I never use indoors was still tucked in the side pocket. The compartment lock wasn't damaged. Nothing else in the desk was disturbed. I turned the house over, looking for it anyway. Checked camera cases, jacket pockets, the floor mats in my car, and the laundry room shelf where I dump keys. I even looked in ridiculous places: freezer drawer, bathroom cabinet, because once something goes missing, your brain loses dignity fast. I never found it. Maybe I misplaced it myself. That's the clear explanation. Tired from the drive, rattled, moved it somewhere stupid, forgot. I have tried very hard to accept that version. The problem is, I remember putting it away. I remember sliding the tiny card from the recorder, setting it in the plastic case, and putting that case in the back corner of the locked compartment, because I told myself I didn't want to look at it again until I decided what to do. And when I opened the compartment weeks later, the case was there, empty. I don't stop at isolated forest rest areas at night anymore, which is a sentence I never thought I'd have a reason to say because for most of my adult life, those were the places I liked best. Now, if I want ambient sound, I go earlier, or I go with someone else, or I set the recorder near the car and don't wander off because I know exactly how little it takes for a quiet place to stop being yours. I still use the same handheld recorder. It works fine. Minus work, levels work, battery door still sticks a little in cold weather the way it always has. On some drives, I even catch myself reaching for it out of habit when the roadside sounds good after rain. Then I remember those 2 voices already knew where I was before I reached the gravel. And the part I can't fit into any explanation. The thing that keeps this from feeling finished is that nobody at that hidden site ever came up to me. But somehow the only thing missing from my locked desk compartment was the card that recorded them telling each other to let me leave.